Heat shimmered over the well while a boy stumbled and hands shoved him back. A hammer beat a hard rhythm as a new board went up. No Indians. Its shadow falling across the town barrel. Dust rose, dry as judgment. The boy lifted a dented tin cup and a knuckle knocked it from his fingers. Clara Finch stepped between the cup and the jeers, the noon sun burning her neck while the water dipper cooled her wrist. "No one owns water," she said, voice steady but not loud, and she tipped the dipper until the tin sang. The boy's throat worked as he drank. Heat clung to the boards. The splash kept its own small music. "Move along," someone muttered, but no one reached for her. The deputy's stare found her, heavy as a rope, then slid away. Clara filled the cup a second time. Mercy, like water, makes its own road. When the cup was full again, the boy's hand hovered, unsure. He dug into a little pouch and pressed a single sky blue bead into her palm, cool and bright as river light. Their eyes met, fright and thanks, hunger and dignity. Then he darted past the sign and was gone, a shadow arrowing toward the cottonwoods. Between the hammer's last echo and his fading steps, something shifted in her chest. Clara closed her fingers over the bead, feeling its small round truth. Signs point to fences, others to crossings. By sundown, gossip would spread. By morning, she would walk toward the water. The river moved slow beneath cottonwoods. In town, tongues ran quick, and mercy cost. By afternoon, Clara Finch felt the story of the dipper ripple past doors and reckoning. She kept her needle going anyway, humming a river hymn to steady her breath and the ache of being watched. The blue bead rested in her tin beside a small wooden dipper charm. Sky beside water, promise beside luck. Widow had meant quiet, but not this kind. The harsh hush after a man's belittling voice finally stopped. He had measured her softness like waste and weighed her shoulders like shame, and some of it still clung. Work kept her upright, hems for miners' wives, patches for boys, careful accounts scratched in a neat, stubborn hand. Heat poured through the window panes, the bead cooled her palm. Dignity fought the small, familiar pull of fear. Outside, the deputy paused in her doorway, hat brim cutting shade across his eyes, voice almost friendly as warning. "Best not encourage strays," he said. "Agency has regulations. Keep to your side of the road, Miss Finch." She stitched through the silence and answered simply, "I mind my own," and let his gaze slide off her. When he left, the room felt smaller, like a dress cut too tight by someone careless with the pattern. Down the slope, Cottonwood Ford shimmered, the slow river shouldering past stones, cottonwoods threading shade along its modest bend. On a flat of good grass under the agency's watching, a Lakota tiyóšpaye, extended family, kept camp near the ford. Smoke lifted in soft columns, children's laughter carried like thread. Hunters and aunties moved with unhurried purpose and care. Wagons brought rations twice a month, ledger and pencil in a white hand. The rest they made themselves. Clara stood in her doorway and looked without prying, learning where not to step, holding respect and curiosity together. Water was everyone's language. Hunger was too. The ford kept reminding anyone willing to listen. One morning she noticed a quiet man crossing Main Street, a willow flute tucked along his arm, unplayed. He spoke Lakota to a cousin, then English to the storekeeper, an interpreter by bearing, a carver by the tool marks on his hands. Their eyes met without noise. He nodded, respectful. She nodded back and felt her humming catch, then continue. She understood the choice in his silence, the way a song can become a target, and honored it. Music held its breath. The street preferred boots and hammers. Business thinned after the well, predictably. 2 customers drifted off. Rent came due with apology. Coins clicked light in her tin. At her lowest, she refused to become small, shoulders rounding wider instead, as if to carry something better than shame. She lifted the bead and the carved dipper, sky and water resting in her palm like a pair of instructions. Symbols are not magic, she told herself, but they remind the will to stand up and step forward. Fear folds you, love moves you. The river keeps going, whether anyone approves or not. Evening gathered its colors. The town cooled. The deputy's warning lingered like smoke, but the cottonwoods talked louder. She wrapped a loaf and a twist of meat, rolled her needle kit tight, and blew out the lamp. The bead went back into the tin. The dipper charm rode in her pocket, warm against the ache. Somewhere beyond the cottonwoods, a child would wake thirsty. Kindness would ask for feet, not only thoughts. Clara felt the old names rise and the new name come, quiet as prayer. Waterbringer, neighbor, unafraid. At dawn, she would follow. The sound of river and step beyond the sign's shadow. At dawn, she crossed the placard's shadow into cottonwood shade. Fear behind her, water ahead. The town still slept light, but a dog barked once and a curtain lifted. Clara carried a loaf wrapped in cloth, a twist of dried meat, her tin, and the long-handled dipper swinging like a bell without sound. She kept to the river road, where dew cooled her boots and the air smelled of willow and silt. A meadowlark tried out a phrase and gave it up, as if even birds understood when a song might draw trouble. She found the boy near the ford, kneeling beside his tin cup. He looked smaller without the noon glare, like a sapling that had bent and kept growing. His aunt stood nearby, cotton dress patched tidy, eyes measuring and not unkind. Clara stopped out of reach and lifted her palm so they could see she carried only bread and water. "May I?" she asked, the air between them, the dipper catching a hoop of river light. The aunt's chin tipped once. Clara dipped, poured. The cup filled to the lip and trembled. The boy drank and did not spill. The river went on, indifferent to town rules. Kindness and cruelty looked the same from its surface, two faces leaning, only one left athirst. She broke the loaf with her hands, offered the rough heel first, and set the meat on the cloth between them so choosing would be free. The aunt nodded again, still wary, gratitude laced with protection. When the boy reached, Clara saw his moccasin split along the side, sole lifting like a mouth in need of closing. "I mend," she said softly, touching the roll of waxed thread at her belt. "If you allow it." Permission mattered. The aunt weighed her and then held out the shoe. Clara knelt on damp earth and worked the needle through softened leather, fingers swift, stitches even and generous. Not the small mean bite of her late husband's words, but a firm, kind seam. The boy watched the mending as if it were a story, then ate, hunger yielding to warmth. From his pocket he drew a slender willow whistle, cracked lengthwise along a grain line. He held it out, uncertain. "I can bind it," Clara said, and waited. The aunt's mouth eased. She nodded. Clara aligned the split, wrapped the whistle with waxed linen until the seam lay close, then added a thin strip of buckskin as a splint, her needle anchoring bridge to wood. "Try only if you wish," she murmured. The boy lifted it and breathed. A faint breath note trembled and broke, more reed than song. He did not force it. Silence today could be a promise instead of a cage. The aunt stepped forward and placed another bead in Clara's palm, sky blue like the first, small as a teardrop that did not fall. Clara's throat tightened. She tore a scrap of thread from the edge of her cloth, strung both beads, and tied them to the dipper's handle. The blue clicked lightly against wood, water's echo in a different form. "I will keep this full," she said simply, not as vow for anyone but herself. "When you need, I will bring." From the road, a rider slowed, saw, and rode on. Witness was a risk. She did not pretend otherwise. Captivity lived in rules that made neighbors strangers. Choice lived in steps that crossed quiet distances. She filled the cup again, then the aunt's kettle, then another pot brought by a girl with braids and a smile that flickered and stayed. Tomorrow, she will return again. Heat thinned to river cool as lessons changed hands, and names waited their hour. By the third morning, she brought the mended whistle, her dipper bright with borrowed sky, and courage that felt like cool water. The boy saw her and tugged his aunt's sleeve. The woman moved aside from the cook fire and nodded toward a patch of shade. Clara set down bread, meat, and the bucket, then asked permission with her open hands and a look that promised no hurry. Aloud, She hauled water from the ford while the women beaded, learning a steady rhythm of stepping in and back without splashing mud. Heat lived in town where tempers baked. Here, water softened the day's hard edges, and voices folded open like wet clay. She returned the whistle. The seam was tight and the splint smooth, but the aunt touched the boy's wrist and said, "Later." Some songs belonged to safety, and safety asked patience. They traded knowledge like neighbors. Clara showed how to patch a rent from the inside so it wouldn't pucker. The aunt timed sage tea to pull bitterness down into medicine. Choke cherries, dried on willow trays while a girl checked for pits with quick fingers, laughing whenever purple stained Clara's thumb. An older man lifted a boot whose sole was thin as paper, and she traced and cut a heavier one, showing a lacing stitch that crossed like bridges. "Stitch to strengthen, not to punish," she said, and he kept the sentence the way men keep useful tools. Chaska arrived near midday with shavings in his hair and the quiet flute across his arm, carrying a small block of darker wood. He greeted his kin, nodded to Clara, and sat where shade braided with sun, shaping a mouthpiece with patient, sure cuts. When he paused, he asked, "Will you teach me letters?" Not apologizing for wanting, not boasting either. She brought out her measurement slate and chalk, and he spoke his name slowly so she could hear its music. She wrote Chaska straight and careful. His broad fingers steadied the chalk and copied the shapes without shame in relearning a child's work. Beside it, she printed water and river, and he tapped each word once, trying their bones aloud before smiling like a man greeting a friend. In turn, he taught her how breath wants focus, how cottonwood leaves talk to a player about wind, and he set the flute aside unplayed. Silence here wasn't fear. It was patience ripening, a promise the air would keep. Children drifted, then settled. Work kept on. Everyone laughed when the youngest drenched his shirt with a whole dipper and declared himself cooled. Clara spilled a little on her hem and curtsied to the river, and the aunt's smile reached her eyes. Some days Clara left the dipper hanging from a willow branch, the 2 blue beads clinking. Other days she carried it home as ballast against hard tongues. A girl pressed another blue bead into her palm, and Clara threaded it on a scrap and tucked it in her pocket, the first on a private string close to skin. She kept her hands busy and her questions modest, and the tiyóšpaye kept its dignity, sharing use, not secrets, welcoming without display. In the sewing circle, nimble fingers set triangles into diamonds, then diamonds into a star that opened, like dawn over the river bend. Clara learned to cut along the firm grain so the points stayed true, and she offered a trick to keep a patch from puckering. A star could be guidance, celebration, or simply a way to hold light. She let its meanings rest without pressing. When the kettle was lifted and coals were banked, Chaska fitted the dark mouthpiece and breathed one testing note, no louder than a bee's pass. It held and faded. He met Clara's gaze and asked with a tilt whether that was enough for now. She nodded, because some bridges are built in quiet. Evening gathered. The boy walked carefully with his whistle, and Clara felt the path settle under her feet like trust. Heat and haste belonged to town. Here the river taught a slower courage. Tomorrow she will carry chalk. Under cottonwood shade, silence softened. Into gratitude, town rumor fell away like dust meeting rain. Tomorrow brought chalk and work. By week's turn, the tiyóšpaye invited her to a small public thanksgiving. Wopila, spoken here as simple thanks and shared food. Pots simmered, bread tore, and children rooted like saplings around the circle. Clara stood at the edge with her dipper and a measured breath, willing to accept only what was freely offered, nothing more. The boy's grandmother rose, small and weathered as a root that had outlasted many winters. She looked at Clara like a neighbor, not a spectacle. "You carry water," she said in careful English. "Today, we call you water-bringer." The old names, soft, foolish, too much, lifted like chaff and blew away. This one settled with the clean weight of a full bucket. Clara bowed her head, so the boundary was visible to all. "Thank you," she said. "I will hold only what you mean me to hold. I will not speak about what is not mine." Then she gave a small truth to earn the name she was receiving. A husband whose dull words cut, the way shame tried to fold her smaller. The afternoon she stepped between a thirsty child and a hard command. Mercy is not weakness, she finished. Mercy is water, Leaves answered with a low murmur. Chaska sat nearby with his willow flute, the new mouthpiece fitted. He waited until the kettle sighed and children stilled, then lifted the flute and released a first true phrase, a clean, spare line, like a path across frost. No bravado, no hurry. Clara let it cross the space and added a hum, unclaimed by any. Church or parlor, silence and music met and didn't bruise. They held each other like two hands at rest. Women unfolded the work that had grown on their laps. A star-patterned blanket, points true, colors set like dawn, reds, sky blues, a dark river line keeping them steady. They did not dress it in explanations. It was skill and honor, warmth and light held in cloth. They wrapped it over Clara's shoulders for one breath, then around a child who might need it later. Gifts, like rivers, move. A small hand tugged at her skirt. The child opened, a fist to two more sky blue beads bright as water under noon. "For your string," the girl whispered. Clara offered her palm flat and let the beads be placed. She threaded them onto the little length she kept in her pocket, the lone bead now joined by two companions, and tied the tail neat. The beads clicked softly, a pocket river, a quiet promise. Food went round. Stew with sage, fry bread crisp at the edges, choke cherries tart and sweet. Clara ate what was offered and passed the rest, taking care not to make gratitude into debt. Names can fence a life or open a gate, she thought. Waterbringer opened one, and the old hurt sloughed like silt from stone. The river kept it steady. Talk. The dipper's beads shone at her thumb. The flute lay quiet. The star blanket waited for its next good use, a chorus of simple things saying who they were to each other. Beyond the shade, the town's boards were going up, and certain men liked to light torches. For now, music and water agreed. When the thanks ended, Clara lifted her dipper and walked home, the beads glinting like a small lantern for the road. Ahead. By week's end, placards would bloom like blight on the wells, and knights would gather torches, testing whether kindness could hold its ground beside law, fear, and heat together. By week's end, boards bloomed like weeds on wells, and torches turned dusk into threat. Men carried planks with fresh black letters, hammering them above every barrel and pump. "Keep the road clear," the volunteer captain called, pitch dripping from his torch. Clara stepped down, the dipper in her hand as if it were any other Monday. She made many small trips in open daylight, the bucket swinging, the blue beads on the handle clicking like a modest bell. Children saw and waved. Some women looked away, then looked back. The deputy's gaze skidded off her like a dry leaf across water. Heat tightened the street. Water answered with its cool, body to body. At the dress shop, the owner twisted a ribbon until it stretched thin and said she was sorry. Business was business. Her associations made her unfit in certain eyes. Clara folded her thimble into her palm, took her needlebook, and stood straighter. Shame offered its old chair, and she did not sit. "I stitch true," she said. "That will not change. Law without love is a fence with no gate." A rider from the agency clattered through dust with a notice. The camp was to be moved before harvest, roads and rations cited as reasons that did not mention people. The aunt read the paper with her chin lifted. The grandmother softened the boy's hair with her hand. Worry moved through the circle like wind through grass. Choke cherries were not ready. Tools were half mended. The Ford was home for now. Clara felt the push to smallness and chose the other way. Chaska came from town with the flute wrapped in cloth, not on his arm. He touched the bundle as one touches a sleeping thing. "Not now," he said quietly. "They will call a song something. It is not." He was careful with what belonged to everyone. Peace, welcome, air. She nodded. "Then our silence will mean watchfulness, not consent." He smiled a little, because she had learned the difference. Music waited with patience. Work did not stop. She drafted testimony by lamplight, the dipper on the table, the beads strung longer so her fingers had something kind to do. The words were plain as boards and meant to hold. I, Clara Finch, have seen neighbors fetch water at the ford. I have witnessed no harm from the tiyóšpaye. I have witnessed care, women tending fever, men mending a plow, children picking up nails so horses would not lame. Mercy is not a crime. Please permit them to remain until the season turns and work is complete. She sanded the ink, breathed, and copied it twice to offer signatures to anyone whose courage had a pen. In the evenings, she brought the paper to the store, to the blacksmith, to the livery. Some signed quickly, some pressed lips and shifted, kindness fighting custom. She let refusals be refusals and did not beg, collecting names like small stones to weigh a letter enough to stay. By the fire, she helped finish the star blanket. Triangles kissed along their bias. Points met in a steady burst, red and river blue, a quiet brown like good earth. The aunt said, "We will bring this where we are not expected and set it down for everyone. Bridge, not prize." Clara agreed. A blanket's authority was warmth. It held no one captive and welcomed anyone shivering. They kept its story simple. Our hands made this, our hands will share it. Nights burned hotter as the patrol walked, torches shouldering the dark aside, shadows leaping over the road like restless cattle. The flute stayed sleeping. Clara hummed only inside her mouth, no more than breath, and counted the steps between her door and the river. She was afraid. She carried the dipper anyway. When morning's bell rang for a meeting at the central well, men would bring boards and arguments, and the deputy would measure all the faces. Clara folded her testimony into her pocket, slipped the long bead string around her wrist, and lifted the dipper. If heat wanted a stage, water would have a voice. She would not whisper. She would stand where the water and the law met that day. The bell rang hot. The well lay cool. The town chose which to follow. The square was full of breath and boots, hats, tilting like shields against noon. The central well sat in its circle of stone, old as the town, older than most of the names shouting around it. On the far side, a boy stood near his aunt with his willow whistle tucked away under his shirt. A patrolman tossed a pitch on his torch and made the flame leap. The deputy hoisted a board stenciled black and clean. "We will have order," he called, and his eyes cut to Clara as if order and her face could not share the same space. "Some of us forget the rules. We will post them again." Laughter from a few, silence from many, the smell of tar. Clara stepped forward with her dipper and bucket, beads bright against wood. The testimony paper warmed her pocket. She felt the tremor in her knees, then felt it pass. She thought of the river's steady push around stone, how it was not swift here yet, never tired. "No one owns water," she said, as much to herself as to the men with boards. It steadied her mouth. "Miss Finch," the deputy drawled, "best you let the men handle town business." He lifted the placard higher like a badge. She looked at the well, not at him. "If a sign tells a lie," she said, "a woman can answer it." Her hand closed over the bucket handle. She walked until she stood at the stone lip, then turned toward him with a kindness that made some men flinch. "May I see what you are nailing to our thirst?" He laughed and leaned closer so his voice could cut. "You want to read it up close? It says what it says." She did not reach for the letters. She reached for the board. Her fingers caught the edge, and for a breath they stood with it between them, each feeling the other's intention. Then she pulled. It came loose with a squeal from the nail and a rip in the quiet that made birds lift from a distant roof. Gasps scattered. "Clara," someone said, as if a name could be a leash. She set the long edge of the board against the wells. Stone Lip drew one end up and snapped it down. The pine cracked in two clean pieces that smelled of sap and heat. Splinters lifted like a small, bright storm. The deputy stepped in, hand brushing the butt of his gun, but she had already knelt to gather the broken ends. "A lie burns," she said, more prayer than threat. She struck a single match against the stone and touched the fire to the splinters cupped in her palm. Flame licked and leaped, greedy and brief. She held it long enough for every eye to see wood become light and ash, then tipped the burning pieces into the empty bucket. The patrol leaned forward, torches thrust like accusations. Women flinched back with their children. The heat swelled. Clara lifted the dipper, drew water from the well, and poured. A hush moved with the pour. Fire hissed and died. Steam ghosted up and was gone. Heat bowed to water because that is the order of things. She set the wet, blackened shards on the stone. "We could have hung welcome," she said, voice low and even. "We could have hung nothing." She untied the short necklace, the first beads she had been given, the 2 more that followed, all sky bright. She looped it around the post and tied a small square knot a child could undo. Let this mean what water means. Jeers tried to rise. Chaska stepped beside her then, empty hands open to both sides, palms forward so men could read his peace. He looked at no one too directly, at everyone enough. His presence did not ask permission. It offered restraint. He was not her shield or her show. He was a neighbor standing where neighbors stand. The boy with the whistle lifted it from his shirt and breathed a single, clear note. It crossed the square like a bird that knew the way home. It was not loud. It did not beg. It simply chose air over fear. "Enough," the volunteer captain barked, but the word came late. The note had already settled on the water, then faded into noon. Silence reclaimed its place. Not choked, not shoved. Placed, like a tool returned, to the right hook. Clara drew the testimony from her pocket and held it out to the agent who had ridden in, his pen already uncapped by habit. "I have names," she said. "I speak mine. I ask that this camp finish the season." He took the paper because it was offered with dignity. A storekeeper cleared his throat and said, "I signed. I have no quarrel with people who mind their work," and flushed when his own courage surprised him. "Arrest her," someone muttered near the buckets. The deputy's mouth pinched. He had not planned for mercy to look like order. He took a step, and the patrol shifted with him, torches shedding pitch and threat. Clara did not move back. "If a charge is compassion," she said, "say it plain. If a law is fear, then let us fix the law." Her words did not break like wood. They held like cloth stretched true. Behind the crowd, clouds shouldered up from the west, thick and blue on their undersides. Wind found the square, lifting the edge of a woman's shawl, bending flame. The first cool breath of coming rain touched, sweat, and turned it salt in relief. "Stand clear," the agent called, paper tucked into his coat, authority finding its voice under the smell of storm. "Let's hear them in turn." He meant to slow the blood. Chaska's hands stayed open. The boy held his whistle against his chest like a kept promise. Clara touched the beads around the post and the wet, charred wood on the stone and felt both truths at once. Heat remained. Water gathered. Between the two, the town rocked on its heels as if deciding whether to raise a fist or an open hand. Thunder spoke far off, a heavy word rolling closer. The deputy's thumb worried the hammer of his gun. Clara steadied her breath and kept her place by the well, ready to meet the next sound with the same quiet that had carried her here. His thumb touched the hammer. The sky found its seam and tore open. Thunder cracked the square so hard it shook dust from rafters. Rain arrived in a sheet, soaking torches, hats, the deputy's shoulders, the lettering on fallen wood. Flame slumped to smoke. Chaska did not flinch. He kept his hands open, palms forward, water sliding along his wrists like proof. "Holster!" the agency man barked over the rush. His hat brim poured a river. "We'll have order by listening, not shooting." It was not kindness so much as a habit of paperwork and patience. And it worked. The deputy's jaw jumped. The revolver eased back into leather. Power breathed out. Restraint breathed in. "Speak, Miss Finch," the agent said, eyes on the paper she had given him. Not on the whispers crossing the square. Rain tapped the bead string tied to the post, so it clicked like a creak. Clara stepped close to the well where the stone kept a little shelter. She lifted her chin and let her voice find the space the storm had made. "I am the one who broke." "The sign," she said. "If an arrest is required, it is mine to carry. I did it because water is not a border. Because a thirsty child is a neighbor. We are capable of order, that is mercy, and we can keep a road open without closing our hands. She touched the wet, charred pieces. I will help keep that road clear. Her words were simple, not sharp. The square quieted under them the way a horse quiets under a calm palm. She could feel the town trying to decide whether gentleness was strength. We have had help, she added. When my needle could not reach, their hands lifted the work. When fever came to a house on the edge of town, women from the Ford walked in with tea and clothes. We can be decent in both directions. Agent lifted a brow. Who else will speak? Rain braided down his cheek. His book, held under his coat, stayed dry. The boy's aunt stepped from the watchers, skirt heavy with water. She spoke in Lakota first, shaped by patience, and Chaska gave the English clean, no embroidery. We keep the road open. We move our horses when wagons pass. We hunt in season and bring fish for trade. We have mended a gate and a harness, and we have not taken what is not ours. The river is our relative, as it is yours. We ask to finish our work before the cold. She looked no one in the eye too long, granting dignity by not demanding it. A storekeeper cleared his throat, took off his dripping hat, then put it back on because a man needs a hand for courage. When my little girl burned with fever, I was afraid, he said. I went for the doctor. He was miles off. Chaska here came with the grandmother and a woman. He nodded toward the aunt. And they taught my wife tea to cool her. They stayed. They did not ask for coin. My child lived. I can keep a road open for people who kept a life open for me. He blinked water and shame from his eyes and stood straighter. The deputy's anger tried to gather itself, but the rain unstrung it. He's out after dark with a weapon, he said, pointing not at a gun but at the wrapped flute. He was seen near the livery. A whistle for children, Chaska answered, calm as river stone. He unwrapped the cloth and held up the flute, then set it back under his arm, unwilling to make it an argument. I go where I am asked to mend, with hands open. If there is a complaint, name it plain. No defiance. No bowing, just a steady man refusing to be made smaller or larger than he was. Justice is not a drama, Clara thought. It is a straight board held level. The agent took the moment the storm had bought and moved it forward. I hear enough to act. Here is my decision. He lifted his voice so even the men under the eaves would carry it home true. The camp at the Ford will remain through the season. Keep the road open, all of you. Any trouble comes to my office first. The signs can wait. The torches are done. He did not look at the deputy when he said it, which left the man away down. No one cheered. Relief is quieter than victory. The patrol, sullen and wet, lowered their sticks, and smoke-minded men turned their faces to the clean, cold pour. Mothers gathered their children. The bead string winked a small blue yes on the post. Thunder walked off toward the breaks. Clara stood until the square loosened and people became neighbors again. The deputy pushed water off his hat and holstered fully. He met her eyes and then looked past them toward the hills, where weather always came from. He would remember he had stayed, not shamed. They walked back to the cottonwoods through puddles that reflected the sky and broken plates. At the Ford, the grandmother's mouth tightened as she touched the boy's forehead. Fever rode there, bright and sudden as a coal. Rain chills, sweat, bad luck. A child's body is a small fire that needs tending. May I help? Clara asked, and the aunt stepped aside so there would be room for both of them. Consent was the first medicine. They laid the child under the star-patterned blanket, points like dawn circling his small heat. Chaska knelt to split kindling for a steady flame. The grandmother crushed willow bark while the aunt steeped sage as she had taught. Clara fetched water and kept cloths cool, changing them as the boy's breath quickened, then eased, then caught. She hummed low, no hymn anyone could claim, a river sound to steady the room. Night lengthened, the storm softened its fists against the roof, and then opened its hands to a steady drip. The boy's cheeks flushed, then paled. He whispered once, to ask for the whistle. Clara shook her head and smiled. Tomorrow, she said, and he accepted the promise because it was given without hurry. Just before dawn, the fever broke. Not with a shout, but with a gathered loosening, the way a knot finally gives under patient fingers. Sweat cooled. His eyes opened and stayed. The grandmother nodded once, sharp and pleased. Work had been done together, and the world had made room for a child to keep on. They carried him to the door for air and early light. The river walked by, unbothered, as if this rescue were only the ordinary miracle it sees 100 times a season. Chaska lifted the flute and played a fuller song, still spare, now warm, a tune shaped for breathing after a long night. It threaded, through cotton leaves and down to the ford, laying a path none had to fear. The aunt and grandmother looked at Clara the way one looks at a good tool, useful, reliable, not owned. "If you wish it," the grandmother said in English, careful and plain. "We take you as family, by your yes and ours, no binding but choice." She touched the star blanket. "You may carry this when you need it, and we will carry you when you need us." Clara's throat thickened. Old names fell away. Waterbringer, neighbor, now kin by consent. Each one felt like a door opening onto air. She said, yes, not as rescue and not as debt, but as a promise to stand in the circle that had already opened for her. The aunt drew the blanket around Clara's shoulders for a moment. Warmth traveled marrow deep. The blue beads on her string warmed against her skin, small suns in the weathered sky. No one shouted welcome. They simply began to behave as if it were true, exactly the way kinship should arrive. By afternoon, the square had dried in patches. The agent's decision held like a fence with a gate, and men stepped through it instead of kicking. Clara filled her dipper and thought of tomorrow. A season had been granted. A future could be built. Chalk waited in her tin, and the willow flute, when asked, would make a clean, bright morning bell. Morning rose clean as paper. Yesterday's thunder quieted into a flute's first bell. With the square cooled, Clara brought courage and a list of names to the agent. "A small school by the ford," she said. "Open to any child who wishes to learn." He eyed the road, then nodded. "Keep it clear. Keep the peace." Choice, not compulsion, would carry it. They claimed a weathered shed in the tiyóšpaye's shade. Chaska offered a knife and time. "I will carve benches," he said, "and speak between tongues when you ask." Consent wrapped every promise. He asked, "Welcome?" and she answered, "Welcome." Partnership began in the mouth and lived in the hands. By noon the floor was swept and the door swung smooth on new pins. Clara hung her water dipper by the entrance. The blue beads on its handle clicked like a small creek. "Let this remind us," she told the boy, "that thirst is met together." On the second day, the boy climbed Chaska's knee and painted a blue bead on the doorframe, round as river light. "For shared learning," Clara said. The paint dried to a small sky at the threshold, a quiet sign no one had to salute to honor. The first morning, music replaced a bell. One phrase on the willow flute floated from cottonwood shade. Children ran. Adults smiled despite themselves. Silence accepted the invitation rather than the command. Boots and moccasins shared planks. Braids and sunburnt necks leaned over the same slate. Clara faced the board, strong-armed and unhidden, the old shame names slipping away like coats hung for good. "We begin with what we know," she said. "Your name, the river, a story." She printed letters and taught sounds. Children taught her words for cottonwood, water, and friend. "We read to understand," she said, "and we count so no one is cheated." She handed out dull pencils as if they were seeds. A school is a door you leave open long enough for courage to enter. When a breeze cooled the room, the star-patterned blanket came down and covered a thin elder's knees, then a weary mother's lap. It was not a trophy but warmth, points of dawn holding ordinary bodies steady. On feast days, the blue bead necklace rested at Clara's throat like a river she could wear without apology. She did not explain it, she lived it. Days settled into rhythm, morning phrase on the flute, letters, figures, a break to carry buckets, hands washed at the dipper, a song only if invited. Chaska kept benches smooth and the threshold oiled. May I walk you to your porch? He asked. Yes. May I take your hand? Yes. Consent lived in plain daylight, where anyone could learn how gentleness holds. They planned a little garden, more slates, a shelf for books. The deputy rode, passed once, found nothing to quarrel with, and studied the river as if it explained something he had missed. The storekeeper sent paper, saying his girl now read signs in the shop and corrected his sums with a grin. Some nights, after lessons and bread, Chaska played while children dozed and parents lingered. The tune threaded cotton leaves and wandered. The road. We are teaching one another, Clara told a neighbor who worried at the porch rail. That is all. Past pain loosened. Future steps grew sure. Captivity had been a rule that shrank the heart. Choice widened it like a river taking back its old bed. In the long light, the boy lifted his whistle and answered the flute's bell with one bright note. Laughter rose with him, not at him. The road stayed clear. The school's threshold learned. Many feet, and the water dipper shone by the door, beads clicking when the evening breeze came through. Some evenings brought stew. She wore the blue beads. Work continued, mutual. Under the leaves, they grew a future children could trust. Thank you for spending time by the Cottonwoods with us. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes mercy is strength. Tell us in the comments about a small kindness that changed your path. Water carried, a door held, a word that steadied you. Your stories shape the next films we make. We will keep crafting cinematic Western romances that honor gentle masculinity, consent, body acceptance, and the brave work of healing from shame. If you want more tender, morally clear frontier love stories and respectful bridges across cultures, join us for the next chapter. Author's note and sources. With humility, this fictional tale draws on publicly available resources about Lakota, lifeways and kinship, tiyóšpaye, and intentionally avoids sacred ceremonies, private language, or any claims to authority. For deeper learning, please seek Indigenous voices first. Joseph M. Marshall III's The Lakota Way, the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indians Native Knowledge 360-degree, tribally run sites, language programs, and community resources, maintained by Lakota educators and historians. We are grateful to Indigenous authors, knowledge keepers, and teachers whose work lights the trail. Any errors are ours alone. Content guidance. The story portrays bigotry, threatened violence, and closed-door romance with restraint and care. While we depict conflict to reveal moral choices, we aim to center dignity, consent, and mutual protection.